Hi, everybody. We continue to pray for you and trust God during these times that He'll show us exactly the things that He wants us to learn and grow in and do as we look to the future and as we trust in Him. One of my favorite stories that I've heard over the years was a story of an auction house and different items being sold in the auction house. And if you are familiar with auction houses, you know that each item would be brought up individually. They would be presented. Sometimes if it's higher end, they might be talked about. They might tell the story. And then the auctioneer opens the bidding. And then people bid until there's the highest bid and that person wins the item. Well, there's a story of an auction house and they were selling different things from an estate. And this old violin came up. And the violin was beat up. It didn't look like it was in good condition. And the auctioneer didn't really know what to say about it. And so he said, well, this violin, I'll start the bidding at $10 or some low price. And nobody wanted to buy the violin. He even lowered the price. And nobody wanted to buy the violin. But in the back of the room of the auction house, an elderly gentleman stood up, didn't say anything. He started walking up to the front. He came up on the stage and took the violin. And he plucked it a little, listening to it. He turned the knobs, he tightened up the strings or loosened some, and then he took the bow and he began to play. And it was amazing because he was a master violinist. And the music coming out of that violin was amazing. And without even saying anything, without the auctioneer even mentioning anything, bidding started happening. I'll give you $100, $200, $500, and the pricing just went up and up. And nothing had changed about the violin. The only thing that had changed was now that it was in the hand of a master, of an expert. And so often in life, I think we forget we are detached some with the majesty that God is due, with the fact that what it would mean of calling Him our master. And we might think of Him as our boss, right? Or somebody of authority over Him. But there's this aspect of honor and majesty and awe that falls over people when they are in the presence of a master. It might be something when you hear somebody sing so beautifully and it just brings tears to your eyes because they touch your heart so deeply. Now, only people who are masters could actually do that. Now, the name that we'll look at today for God, it has the meaning or feeling of many other names like Elohim and Yahweh, but it basically means God or the Lord. But the feeling it has behind it is the aspect of majesty, is the aspect of God being worthy, of Him being the master. And the name is Adonai. Now, what's interesting about this name of God, if you're familiar with some of the names we've done, you've heard us mention the name Yahweh. Now, Adonai basically means the same as Yahweh, means Lord. Has these feelings behind it of Him being the master and Him being worthy and Him being majestic. But the name itself is about the same as Yahweh. So why would Adonai be used instead of Yahweh? It seems in the Old Testament that Yahweh was used more for the people of Israel, whereas Adonai was used more for people who were not from the nation of Israel. The first place that this name appears is in Genesis chapter 15, verse 2, which I'm going to read really quickly. It says this: when God has made a covenant, it was when God had made a covenant with Abraham, and when God's promise to Abraham was about the future, about Abraham being a blessing to the world. And Abraham includes this name, I think, to show that this promise is not just for Israel, it's not just for Abraham, but it's for everybody in the entire world. And this is what it says in Genesis chapter 15. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, which literally was Adonai Jehovah or Jehovah, using both of those names. What can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? So at this point, Abram didn't have an heir, and so there were all these big promises from God, but there was nobody to fulfill the promise. How could Abraham grow into a great nation if he didn't even have a child? He couldn't pass his estate on to anybody. And he even calls on him, Adonai Jehovah, the God of gods, Lord Almighty, right? The master of all, who is worthy of our praise. I think showing that this promise, the way that God framed it, is that He'd be a blessing to everybody in the whole world. But the point comes back to the feeling behind Adonai, that he is master, that he is worthy. And he's the only one who is completely worthy of us honoring. And it comes back to the question of how much or to what degree do we really honor God? Do we step back and feel in awe and look at him and say, you are the master? And we are just in awe that when things get in your hands, we see such a beauty, just like that master violinist picking up an old beat up violin. Or one of the funny times that this happened to me was when we were in Mexico. We went there for a trip. We were serving in a very low income area. They happened to have a cement basketball court. And one of our part of our team, I guess you could say, we had a basketball team. And so we would go into these areas and we would try to get a basketball game with a local team or with people who just wanted to play. And then as people gathered and watched, then we'd have an opportunity to talk to them after the game. And so what was really funny is I got the ball one time, and all of the people in the neighborhood, this wasn't an organized team, this was more of a pickup game. All the local people just stopped, and they almost stepped aside. And I didn't think of it at the time, but I just saw the gap. I saw the space, and so I drove to the basket. I did a layup, and I made a basket, and they were all excited. And I thought, what just happened? And I asked somebody after the game, and they're like, oh, but you're from America, right? And so I wasn't necessarily a great basketball player. I was decent, but America is where basketball is known, right? Or Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or LeBron James and so many other great athletes and basketball players over the year. And so at that time, basketball was even bigger in the U.S. and even more of a global presence, as the U.S. is the best that it is now. And it was just this awe or this aspect of respect of saying, whoa, there's no way we could beat Americans, because Americans, everybody's good at basketball. It's not true, but it was the perception. And so because of that, as soon as the ball got into an American's hands, everybody just stepped back to watch, because they didn't want to miss what the master could do. Now, I'm no means a master of basketball, but it was the perception. And because they perceived American basketball player in that way, it caused them to just stop and watch. And so often we forget that we need to just step back and honor God as master, as Lord, as mighty, as worthy. And sometimes when we don't step back with that awe and that reverence, we actually miss seeing what God has done and what God is doing and what God wants to do in our lives and in the future. I'm going to read another passage where this name is used. It's interesting because it's in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17. And multiple names for God are used in this verse. And so when Abraham is actually talking to Israel, just telling them, you need to honor God, you need to follow God, you need to trust in God, you need to keep God lifted up. He is worthy, he is your master, he is your Lord. So he's just really trying to elevate God and his name, and for the people to respect and honor and praise this God. He says this, for the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. But in this verse, what Abraham is saying is he's saying he's your Lord, he's your master, you should honor him. He uses the name Jehovah, he uses the name Elohim, he uses the name Adonai, he uses the shortened version of Elohim, El. So he says he is Jehovah, he is Elohim, he is Adonai, he is El. He is God, he is Lord, he is master of everything. You need to honor him, you need to worship him. He is worthy because he is God. And the point of this name is to not forget who God is, that he's worthy, that he's master, that he's Lord. I want to close with this passage out of Psalm 97, which says this. This is the verse 1 through 5, the beginning of the psalm. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the distant shores rejoice and be glad. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and consumes his foes on every side. His lightning lights up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord. Before the Lord of all of the earth, the heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all people will see his glory. I hope that this week you could just pause and step back and just remember that God is master. And that if we don't step back, sometimes we miss seeing his glory because he is Adonai. God bless you.